It was built simply, like a log cabin with the wood showing. However, it was easily 21 yards on each side. The ceiling rose over 16 feet. There were barely any furnishings, just a giant mirror hung on one wall. There was a huge, thick, sturdy table, and there were chairs around the table. Several people sat down. On the table were a number of rolled-up pieces of parchment magic scrolls, and Thei's is the last one, a teleportation scroll. Along with the high-pitched voice high enough to plausibly belong to a young girl, another scroll was placed on the table. The one who put it there was a human woman wearing a maid uniform. She was a dainty little thing. Her hair was done in a chignon style, like dumplings on either side of her head, but something strange was about her, most noticeably in her eyes. They were cute enough, but they had no spark, as if they were made of cheap glass. Not only that, but she never blinked. The collar of the wrist-made outfit covered her slim body. It was high, covering her entire neck. In fact, the only bare skin showing was her face. She was a member of the Pleiades, Entoma Vasilisa Zeta. Now then, there's also a message scroll, so basically there are quite a few. Maybe I could have them clear the table for Nwua. Entoma addressed the one sitting at the head of the table. The figure nodded. Let us do that. Okay, chop chop then, please clean it up. With Cocytus' approval and Entoma's order, everyone around the table began to move at once. They were all grotesques. One looked like a praying mantis. Another looked like a spider. Another looked like a giant brain. Everybody looked very different from one another, but they had two things in common. They were all Cocytus' minions, and they all served Nazarick. That was why they were taking orders from Entoma, even though she was weaker than them. The structure of authority in the great tomb of Nazarick was based not on who was strongest, but on whether one was created directly by the supreme beings or not. In that sense, Entoma was superior. She confirmed the table had been cleared. She mumbled, "Now then, I'll give these to you, Master Cocytus," without opening her mouth. She picked up the bag at her feet. She took out a few rolled-up pieces of parchment. "These are message scrolls. Lord Aints told me they were made with skins acquired by Master Demiurge. He said to report back if you have any trouble using them." "Okay, understood. I'll see if I have any issues." He took several of the proffered scrolls with one of his 4 hands. "Demiurge has gotten ahead of me again," he said, smiling wryly at the minions in the room. Someone answered with a faint, sycophantic laugh. With the parchments in hand, Cocytus fell deep into thought. He had also heard that Nazarick's store of parchment for enchanting with low-level spells was running low. Finding sources of materials to make various items was a very important project. They still had some leeway now, but if they just kept consuming items, they would eventually run out. That was why various people, including their master, were working on it. The apple trees he'd heard about on the 6th level were part of that plan. However, the resource problem was something that Cocytus, who had been appointed to guard Nazarick, could do little about. Of course, he couldn't easily go outside while tasked with guarding the base. It was completely natural that Demiurge, who had ventured out to gain them a foothold, should be the one to solve that problem. Cocytus' associate of equal rank had succeeded in his mission. He should have been happy about it, and really he was. He just couldn't completely extinguish the flames of envy deep in his heart. He was so jealous that his colleague had been of use to a supreme being, a supreme one worthy of their worship, that he couldn't stand it. His own job was to protect Nazarick. It was perhaps more important than any other Guardian's job. Every minion he asked would tell him it was a critical task. They couldn't allow vulgar people to set foot in the hallowed ground made by the supreme beings, but with no raiders, there could be no proof of Cocytus' faithful service. He wanted to do something that could show results. For a guardian, being useful to one's master was a joy. Cocytus wanted to taste that joy too. His chance was here, right now. Cocytus turned his head to gaze at the scene in the mirror as he gripped the scrolls. The reflection was not of the room he was in, but a marsh somewhere. Yes, the view from the mirror of remote viewing was the reason he spent 2 days camped in this log cabin, which Aura had built. This war from the point of view of the overwhelmingly powerful Great Tomb of Nazarick, this was no more than a slaughter, was merely a way to collect corpses. When Cocytus received this mission, which could also be termed a harvest festival, he was given a number of orders straight from the top. First, he, Cocytus, would not face the enemy directly. Of course, that went for his underlings as well. He was to make do with the troops he was provided. Second, he was to hold back the Elder Lick commander until he absolutely needed to deploy him. Third, he was to rely on his own judgment as much as possible. There were a few other small things, but those were the main ones. He needed to somehow claim victory with just the troops deployed around the lake. If he could succeed, he would be able to prove his devotion to his great master. Nice work. I'd like you to thank Lord Ainz for me. Entoma sluggishly bowed her head. So are you going back? No, I was too old to watch how the battle goes from here, so she was overseeing. Having concluded that, he felt a surge of excitement for the mission. Then let us get started. Cocytus cast message and gave orders to the undead commander to march. Bonfires on either side of a raised platform cast a flickering light throughout the area. There were a few lizardmen on the stage. These were important figures, like the chiefs and heads of each tribe. In the open area before them were all the lizardmen who had gathered to fight. A quiet commotion rose from them like sea spray. It was the buzzing of agitation they couldn't completely hide, even if they desperately tried to conceal their worry, panic, and fear. This war was about to start. The close friends standing next to them might turn to corpses in the next moment. Or they themselves could be the ones to fall. That was the kind of battlefield onto which they were headed. Shasryu Shasha stepped forward out of the line of chiefs to hush the crowd. Listen to me, lizardmen. His imposing voice filled the air. Suddenly it was silent enough to hear a pin drop, and his voice echoed even louder. I'll admit, there are a lot of them. No one made a sound, but it was obvious that the throng was upset by this. Shasryu waited a moment before continuing. But there's nothing to be afraid of. We 5 tribes have formed an alliance, the first of its kind in history. Because of this alliance, during this time we are one tribe. That means the spirits of all the tribe's ancestors, even the spirits of tribes not our own, will protect us. Reacting to his voice, Crush Lulu stepped forward, leading the 5 head priests. She removed her clothing, revealing her white scales. Leader of the head priests, Crush Lulu. Responding to his call, she took another step forward. Call the spirits down. Please listen, children of this united tribe. What was this newborn tribe? Crush Lulu spoke firmly and eloquently on the topic, her voice undulating sometimes high, sometimes low, almost like she was singing. At first, almost everyone had been disgusted by the albino, but her bold, confident bearing changed their minds bit by bit as they watched. As Crush spoke, she twisted slightly this way and that. Her white scales glittered in the light of the fire, as if the spirits of their ancestors had descended into her body. Unbeknownst to the audience, their expressions became one of worship. 5 tribes are now one. The ancestral spirits of every tribe will protect all of you. Look, lizardmen, watch as the innumerable spirits of all our tribes descend upon you. Crush spread her arms wide and pointed to the heavens. Many gazes followed her gesture, but of course there was nothing but a cloudy sky. It didn't seem like any spirits were appearing, but someone murmured that little light. The voices started small, but grew bigger and bigger. Several of the lizardmen announced they could see something. Some saw tiny lights. Some shouted they saw lizardmen just like them. Some saw a giant fish. Some were surprised to see children. Others said no, they were eggs. The lizardmen couldn't believe their eyes. They thought it was truly the descent of the ancestral spirits. What else could it have been? Our ancestors are here to protect us. It was only natural that people would start shouting such things. Feel it. Feel their power as it flows into you. They could hear Crush's voice slipping into their hearts from somewhere far away, or perhaps somewhere very close. Guided by that voice, many of the lizardmen felt something resembling power enter them. Feel it. Feel the strength of our ancestors coursing through you. All the lizardmen gathered there felt it for sure, power bubbling up within them. It was an excitement that dispelled all their previous anxiety. It warmed their bellies like strong alcohol. It was real proof that the spirits had descended upon them. Turning away from the sea of rapt expressions before her, Crush nodded to Shasryu. Now, lizardmen. The spirits of our ancestors have come to walk among us. Our opponents may outnumber us, but will we be defeated? No. Still entranced, the multitude of lizardmen responded to Shasryu in chorus. The atmosphere swelled. That is right, the ancestral spirits are with us. We will not be defeated. Destroy our enemies and dedicate the victory to our ancestors. Yeah, their fighting spirit blazed. There were no longer any anxious lizardmen, only lizardmen facing the coming battle as warriors. The army hadn't been dazzled by magic. Even with this many druids gathered, they didn't have the resources to cast spells on this many Lizardmen right before the big fight. The vision was the result of each Lizardman being served a special drink right before the ritual. It was a drink said to inspire bravery, a tradition passed down among the Lizardmen, but its actual effects were short-term intoxication, euphoria, and hallucinations. This elixir was made with a special roasted herb. The drink brought about an altered state of consciousness. Crush's speech was a way to buy time while the drink took effect. Once the trick is revealed, it isn't very interesting. But for those who experienced those effects, the Lizardmen who saw the spirits of their ancestors descend, the ritual really did inspire courage. Now we'll pass around the paint. Normally each tribe would have their own color, but the ancestral spirits of the 5 tribes are in all of you. Decorate yourselves with all the colors. Priests carrying earthenware pots strolled through the crowd. The Lizardmen took paint from the pots and began to paint their bodies with whatever patterns they liked. Supposedly, it was actually the ancestral spirits within them painting, so they all let their fingers run wherever they might go. Many Lizardmen covered nearly their whole bodies, especially since this time the spirits of all 5 tribes had descended. But among them, the Green Claw tribe members barely painted at all. This was due to the fact that the leading members, Shasaryu and Zayusu, didn't decorate themselves very much. Their tribesmen were like fans imitating their idols. When Shasaryu scanned the crowd and saw that most of them had finished, he drew his huge sword and pointed toward the gate. To war, Ra'ag, their roars thundered in the air. Stationed on the marsh, the great tomb of Nazarik's army was split broadly into 2 corps. On the left, facing the Lizardmen, were the zombies. On the right were the skeletons. The skeleton archers and riders were positioned behind the front line on the right. The undead beasts, perhaps meant as the final line, were placed in the rear. Meanwhile, the Lizardmen were also divided into 2 battalions, despite being a small army. On the zombie side were the females and hunters. On the skeleton side were the warriors and males. The priests were inside the walls. Lizardmen had come out of the village because they knew fighting a siege battle wouldn't give them any advantage. Reinforcements weren't coming, and their walls were far from sturdy. Meanwhile, the enemy army consisted of undead that needed neither food nor sleep. At such a disadvantage, fighting under siege would have been the most foolish plan. But forming ranks on the field gave the Lizardmen a harsh awakening as to just how wide the gap in military strength was between the 2 sides. There were more than 3 undead for every one of them, more than 30 for every 10. The ratio didn't change, but 3,000 to 1,000 felt overwhelming. The sight of 3,000 undead forming ranks was strangely oppressive. Still, even under those circumstances, the Lizardmen were no longer afraid. Numbers were not an issue now that their ancestral spirits had descended. Eventually, the undead slowly began to move. The first to march were the zombies and skeletons. Skeleton archers and riders stood immobile in the marsh, perhaps meant to serve as reinforcements. The Lizardmen moved to meet them. Yararog, a thunderous battle cry echoed across the marsh. Countless splashes accompanied it. Water sprayed and mud spattered. With both armies on the march, their clash was imminent. Something unusual happened within Nazarik's army. Although the zombies and skeletons had begun marching at the same time, a gap gradually opened up between them. Zombies moved sluggishly, while skeletons were quick. On top of that, the marsh bogged them down. Slow-moving monsters like zombies were sucked into the mud, which slowed them further. But lightweight monsters like skeletons weren't affected as much. This led to the first clash happening between the skeletons and the warrior caste. The Lizardmen had no formation. They just charged in recklessly and attacked with wild abandon. At the front of the pack were the 5-head warriors. These champions rushed out first. Leading from the front wasn't always a tactically sound decision, but they were the highest-ranking Lizardman warriors. If they didn't fight out front, morale would suffer. This way, all the Lizardman warriors were inspired and overflowing with fighting spirit. Next to charge were the Razortail Tribe's 89 heavy warriors. They had the highest defense out of any Tribe's warriors. They were clad in leather armor and even equipped with leather shields. They held up their shields. Their lines met the skeleton forces like a contiguous wall. With a crash, the skeleton vanguard joined battle with the Lizardmen front lines, and then bones scattered as the Lizardmen cut deep into the skeleton formation. Angry roars thundered. The sound of breaking bones rang out again and again. At times there were groans as living warriors fell, but the clatter of bones greatly outnumbered them. At a glance, the battle overwhelmingly favored the Lizardmen. If they had been humans, perhaps the situation would have been reversed. Skeletons had bone bodies. This made them practically immune to stabbing weapon damage. They also had high resistance to cutting weapons. For humans who primarily used swords, it would have been difficult to deal damage effectively. The Lizardmen had such an advantage because of their unrefined primary weapons. These weapons were maces made of rocks. Skeletons were vulnerable against crushing weapons. Every time a Lizardman swung, brittle skeleton bones crumbled. Even if they could stand one hit, they'd be completely demolished by the next. Meanwhile, the Lizardmen's thick scales often deflected the skeleton's rusty swords. Occasionally one of the warriors was injured, but it wasn't a critical, life-threatening injury. In this first skirmish alone, almost 500 skeletons sank to their final resting place in the marsh. Cocytus was dumbfounded by what he saw in the mirror. This was still just the first wave of attack, but the ability of the Lizardmen was beyond what he'd expected. Cocytus was a brilliant warrior. He had been able to anticipate their strength to some degree. Certainly, the gap in individual aptitude between skeletons and Lizardmen was obvious. A lone skeleton had no chance of beating a lone Lizardman, but he thought that such a numerical advantage more than compensated for that. Then what had happened? It almost seemed like the Lizardmen had powered up somehow. The way they were now, probably only the skeleton archers and riders could match them. Even as he watched, the skeletons rapidly crumbled. So the only purpose the skeletons and zombies serve is to tire them out. In that case, his only effective units were the 300 undead beasts, the 150 skeleton archers, and the 100 skeleton riders, only 550. It was a reversal in numbers. Cocytus did some calculations in his head. Undead was strong. Especially in a protracted battle, there weren't so many who could defeat them. Undead didn't feel fear, pain, or anything. Fatigue was also not a factor. They didn't require sleep. It went without saying how much of an advantage that became during a war. Suppose one were hit in the head with a stone mace. That would mean instant death for a living thing if unlucky, but even with luck, there would be severe pain and a lot of bleeding. It is a self-evident truth that it would very quickly lose the will to fight. Of course, there were soldiers who underwent training to withstand pain and wouldn't give up so quickly. But for most, that would be their breaking point. That was only natural for a living thing. But what about an undead? If its head was cracked open, it would attack with its brains spilling out. If its arms were broken, it would attack with its broken arms. No legs, it would crawl. Indeed, an undead would continue to move until it lost every remnant of its false life. As long as the conditions for instant death weren't met, often decapitation for lower level. Undead, they wouldn't succumb to pain like humans did. In that sense, undead were the ideal soldiers. The Lizardmen have bested them on an individual level, I'll admit that. But how long can that last? Cocytus raised his opinion of the Lizardmen up a notch. He concluded that it wouldn't be possible to crush them all at once. What he needed to do was draw out the battle. Should we pull back and see how we're doing? That seems like a good idea. I think we should send the archers and riders out there. Nah, keep pushing like we are now and wait until they're exhausted. And then what? If we don't take the enemy base, they'll just go there to recover, and that'll be that. That is true. It seems like they've strengthened their defenses, but those walls are flimsy. Why don't we sack that village, then encircle their forces and annihilate them? Having gotten input from a number of minions, Cocytus picked up a message scroll. He glanced at Intoma. She was looking with disinterest at the mirror. She had brought something like a green cookie up near her jaw. Soon after came light crunching noises. Her attitude suggested she wasn't concerned. Perhaps that explained her expressionless face. No, that was just for looks. He recalled her true form and realized how foolish he was for checking her expression. Cocytus' friend, and one of the 5 most evil beings in Nazarick, the Prince of Fear, called her a most horrible predator of his relatives. That was her true nature. He gave up on trying to grasp the feelings of their master, who must have been the reason she was there from her face. He used the scroll to message the commander. Are they underestimating us? Zenbel murmured. His voice was low, but from where he was, getting a view from the top of the mud wall, it was loud enough that everyone could hear him. The archers and riders Haven T budged, complained Zenbul. All I can think is that they ray mocking us. Yeah. I figured they'd come all at once to crush us, said the small Fang chief. Zombie fight going well. There were only 45 lizardmen facing the zombies, mostly consisting of the few hunters.